Trucks are built to dominate the roads, carrying heavy loads and powering through highways with sheer force. But when things go wrong, that same power turns deadly. In this video, we're diving into 5 of the most horrifying truck crash deaths ever recorded. Each one is brutal, shocking, and unforgettable.
Un trágico accidente ocurrió la madrugada de este sábado sobre la carretera Escárcega-Villahermosa, en el estado de Campeche, en el sureste de México.
It was February 8th, 2025, on the Escárcega-Villahermosa highway in southern Mexico. Inside a Tours Acosta bus, 48 passengers were present. They had left Cancun the night before, embarking on an overnight journey to Tabasco. At around 2 a.m., the calm of the night was ripped apart. A massive trailer truck, barreling in the opposite direction, suddenly veered into the bus's lane. There was no time to brake. In the blink of an eye, steel met steel in a head-on collision of unimaginable force. The impact ignited the bus instantly, transforming it into a rolling fireball. Within moments, the night sky lit up orange, the flames rising high enough to be seen from miles away. By dawn, the only thing left of the bus was its skeletal metal frame, charred beyond recognition. 41 people, including both drivers, never made it out alive. The fire moved too fast, consuming everything in its path. Survivors described waking up to suffocating smoke, screams of panic, and unbearable heat closing in. Some clawed their way to the windows, shattering glass with bare hands, cutting themselves in desperation. Bystanders who rushed to the scene tried to pry open doors, but the inferno roared back, forcing them to retreat. A few lucky passengers managed to crawl out, stumbling into the night with broken bones, scorched skin, and haunted eyes. Among them was a little girl with a fractured skull and a man whose body was burned so badly that even doctors struggled to save him. Another passing truck stopped, loading the injured onto its flatbed and rushing them toward hospitals in nearby towns. But for most, it was too late. On the roadside, relatives' worst nightmares were confirmed. 41 lives had been wiped out in a matter of minutes, and the bodies were so badly burned that officials told grieving families identification would take months. DNA testing, they said, was the only way. The heartbreak only deepened as relatives gathered in Tabasco, some refusing to believe their loved ones were gone, others collapsing in grief as vigils with candles and prayers began to fill the streets. The bus company, Tours Acosta, insisted that the vehicle was in optimal condition and traveling at a moderate speed, in line with federal rules, but questions arose almost immediately. Was one of the drivers overtired after too many hours on the road? Witnesses at the scene claimed the truck had swerved recklessly into oncoming traffic moments before the crash. Authorities did not rule it out. As investigators combed through the wreckage, fragments of bone and 18 skulls were recovered. Grim reminders of how violent the inferno had been. The tragedy sent shockwaves through Mexico. Local leaders arrived quickly, offering condolences and promising aid. The governor of Tabasco, Javier May, declared that state and federal forces would coordinate to uncover the truth. Even the highest offices of government were pulled in. Jose Ramiro Lopez Obrador, brother of the president, was charged with overseeing the investigation, while forensic teams worked tirelessly night and day to recover remains and provide families with answers. It was the morning of December 29th, 2024, in Ethiopia's Sidama region. On the Galana Bridge, a truck packed with passengers pushed forward. Too many people crammed together, holding on tightly as the vehicle swayed across the narrow road. Some had just finished long days at a coffee work site, their clothes still carrying the smell of harvest. Others were dressed in celebration, returning from a wedding where music and laughter had filled the night. For many, it was supposed to be a simple journey home. Instead, it became a nightmare. As the truck approached the bridge, its wheels hugged the edge of a road notorious for sharp bends and steep drops. Then, in a terrifying instant, control was lost. The vehicle swerved, skidded, and before anyone could scream, it plunged off the bridge into the Ganaldoria River below. The crash was so sudden, so violent, that the truck was swallowed by the water with dozens of people trapped inside. The scene that followed was devastating. Locals rushed toward the river, wading into the current, shouting names, clawing through mud and debris in desperation. But the water gave little back. Bodies began to surface, pulled out one by one and laid on the riverbank, blue tarps covering what was once life. 68 men and 3 women, gone in an instant. Entire families shattered. Neighbors and friends lost together. Some parents had buried children in the mud of the river. Some children had lost their parents forever. A few survivors clung to life. 4 people were pulled out alive, battered and broken, their breaths shallow. They were rushed to Bona General Hospital, one in such critical condition that doctors transferred him to a referral hospital hours away. Their words were barely whispers, but their eyes carried the horror of what they had just lived through. The sound of metal tearing, the helpless cries of those trapped underwater, the silence that followed. Officials later confirmed what many feared. The truck had been dangerously overloaded, carrying far more passengers than it ever should have. Some were sitting on top of the vehicle, others squeezed shoulder to shoulder inside. It was a deadly gamble. A common sight on Ethiopia's roads where transportation is scarce, regulations weak, and drivers often forced to push the limits. Witnesses said the vehicle had missed the bridge entirely, plunging straight into the river as if swallowed by the bend itself. By nightfall, the riverbank had become a place of mourning. Families wept openly, clinging to each other for support, their cries echoing across the valley. Volunteers and rescuers, exhausted and mud-stained, stood in silence after hours of pulling bodies from the water. The weight of the tragedy was unbearable. 71 lives lost in a single instant, all because of one overloaded truck and one dangerous road. For Ethiopia, it was another entry in a grim pattern. Deadly road accidents have long haunted the country, where poorly maintained vehicles, overburdened trucks, and treacherous roads claim thousands of lives each year. But for the families left behind in Sidama, statistics meant nothing. This wasn't just another number. It was brothers, sisters, mothers, fathers, gone in a single plunge off the Galana Bridge. It was just before dawn on December 21st, 2024, when the BR-116 highway in Minas Gerais, Brazil, turned into a scene of pure horror. The night had been quiet, the roads carrying the usual heavy mix of passenger buses, family cars, and massive freight trucks. But in Lahinia, a district of Teofilo Otoni, that silence was torn apart in an instant. A passenger bus, a small Fiat Argo, and a massive B-double road train collided in one of the most devastating crashes Brazil has seen in nearly 2 decades. Flames roared, twisted metal blocked the highway, and screams pierced the dark. By the time rescuers arrived, 39 people were gone, their lives snuffed out in the chaos, with 7 others fighting for survival. It was the deadliest traffic accident on Brazil's federal highways since records began in 2007. The BR-116 is infamous, often described as the country's most dangerous stretch of road, haunted by frequent disasters. With its endless flow of heavy trucks, especially those hauling granite from northern Minas Gerais, crashes are tragically common, and this one came right in the midst of the year-end rush, when highways are most crowded. Experts had long warned of the road's structural flaws and the lack of proper oversight. Even worse, the radar near the crash site, meant to keep speeds in check, had been removed just months earlier when a government contract expired. Locals already called this highway the Rodovia da Morte, the Highway of Death. That night, it lived up to its name. At first, firefighters thought the bus's tire had blown, sending it straight into the oncoming truck at high speed. But the truth was far darker. Investigators later revealed that a massive granite block had fallen from the truck's load, slamming into the bus and forcing it out of control. In seconds, the bus burst into flames. Inside, passengers were trapped, unable to escape as the fire consumed everything. The Fiat Argo, unable to stop in time, smashed into the wreckage and slid beneath the truck. Miraculously, its passengers survived, but most inside the bus were not as fortunate. When rescuers finally reached the wreckage, they found bodies so badly burned they could hardly be identified. Then came the shocking twist. The truck driver, whose license had already been suspended after refusing a breathalyzer test 2 years earlier, walked away from the inferno unharmed and vanished into the night. Receipts showed he had been hauling granite blocks far heavier than legally allowed, traveling from Ceará to Espírito Santo. Security cameras captured the horrifying moment of impact and the explosion that followed, but the man at the center of it all had disappeared. For 2 days, his whereabouts remained a mystery, while the families of victims buried their loved ones just before Christmas. Brazil's president, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, expressed his grief online, calling the tragedy terrible and offering prayers for the survivors. The the governor of Minas Gerais vowed full mobilization to support those affected. The bus company, Emtram, released a statement of regret, but for many, words felt hollow compared to the scale of the loss. On December 23rd, the driver finally surrendered to police. To the disbelief of grieving families, he was not held in custody. The court ruled it was too late to arrest him in flagrante. It seemed for a time that he might escape accountability, but investigators pressed on and the truth only deepened the outrage. A toxicology report revealed he had multiple drugs in his system: cocaine, ecstasy, MDA, alprazolam, and venlafaxine. It wasn't just negligence. It was recklessness pushed to deadly extremes. Finally, on January 21st, 2025, nearly a month after the crash, authorities arrested him. By then, the shock had rippled far beyond Minas Gerais. The images of that charred bus and twisted highway had already burned themselves into Brazil's memory. For the families left behind, justice had barely begun, but the haunting memory of that December morning on the BR 116 would never fade.
The truck lost control, running over pedestrians, business people and matatus that were parked by the roadside. More than 30 people are receiving treatment in different hospitals.
On the evening of June 30th, 2023, Londiani Junction in Kericho County, Kenya was bustling the way it always does. It was noisy, lively, ordinary, until everything changed in the span of a heartbeat. From the top of the road, a lorry carrying a heavy shipping container began to lose control. Witnesses later said the driver seemed to swerve in an attempt to avoid a broken-down bus blocking part of the road, but the maneuver only pushed the massive truck into the heart of the crowded junction. What followed was pure devastation. The lorry came thundering down like a runaway beast. It plowed through minibuses packed with passengers, slammed into market stalls where traders had been standing seconds earlier, crushed motorcycles, cars, and everything else in its path. Pedestrians had no chance to run. The sound was deafening, metal twisting, glass exploding, screams cutting through the chaos. In seconds, the lively marketplace was reduced to rubble and ruin. When the dust settled, the scale of horror became clear. At least 52 people lay dead. Many were market traders, parents shopping with their children, or boda riders waiting for fares. Another 30 were injured, some critically, trapped beneath the wreckage as rescuers fought desperately to pull them out. Heavy rain made everything harder. Mud slowed down emergency crews. Visibility was poor, and bystanders dug frantically with their bare hands to help free the trapped. For survivors, the memories were seared into their minds. Some recalled loved ones being there 1 second and gone the next. Others described how the lorry cut through the crowd like a blade, its red container finally tumbling off and landing on a grassy slope by the roadside. The Kenyan Red Cross rushed to the scene, organizing an urgent blood donation drive for the injured, while ambulances raced back and forth to local hospitals overwhelmed by casualties. Across Kenya, the shock spread quickly. News outlets carried blurred images of bodies lying under sheets, twisted vehicles piled against each other, and stunned survivors staring at the wreckage. President William Ruto addressed the nation, calling the crash horrific. He reminded Kenyans that among the dead were young people full of promise and business owners who had left home that day expecting to return. Governor Eric Mutai of Kericho echoed the grief, admitting his heart was crushed and calling it one of the darkest moments in the county's history. Yet, alongside grief came anger. Road crashes are nothing new in Kenya. More than 4,600 people died in road accidents in 2022 alone, according to the National Transport and Safety Authority. Experts blame a toxic mix of poor road conditions, aging vehicles, reckless driving, and weak enforcement. Africa, with only 3% of the world's vehicles, accounts for nearly 20% of global road deaths. For many, Londiani was not just an accident. It was the latest reminder of an epidemic that keeps claiming lives. Transport Minister Kipchumba Murkomen promised sweeping reforms in response to the tragedy. Stricter driver testing, speed cameras on dangerous highways, and relocating roadside markets away from high-traffic areas. But many Kenyans met those promises with skepticism. For families who had lost loved ones, no new regulation could undo what had happened in that market. By morning, Londiani Junction was no longer just another roadside market. It had become a symbol of grief. Flowers, candles, and handwritten notes began to appear at the site. Parents wept openly for children they would never see again. Survivors, still in shock, replayed the moment when life went from ordinary to unbearable. June 30th, 2023 was not just another statistic. It was a scar left on an entire community. It was the day a bustling marketplace turned into a graveyard in the span of seconds. And for Kericho, for Kenya, and for Africa, it was another painful reminder that behind every road accident number is a face, a family, and a story cut short.
At least 6 people have been killed in the Netherlands after a lorry ploughed off-road and into a community barbecue on Saturday.
It was a warm summer evening on August 27th, 2022, in the quiet Dutch hamlet of Zuidzide near Nieuw-Beierland. Families and neighbors gathered under a canopy for a barbecue hosted by their local ice skating club. The scene was idyllic, children laughing, plates filled with food, bunting strung between trees. Then, in an instant, that peace was obliterated. A truck, belonging to a Spanish transport company, appeared on the dike road above. Witnesses later recalled seeing it pause at a junction, as if uncertain. Then, instead of continuing safely, the massive vehicle veered off the embankment. It plummeted down the slope and straight into the heart of the gathering, smashing through tables, chairs, and the people who only moments earlier were celebrating together. The joyful hum of conversation turned into screams, chaos, and silence. By the time rescue workers arrived, the devastation was clear. 6 lives were lost instantly, and hours later, a 7th, an unborn baby, was also counted among the victims. 7 others were rushed to hospitals, one clinging to life in critical condition. Survivors stood frozen, staring at plates still resting on broken tables. A barbecue turned into a nightmare. The driver, a 46-year-old Spaniard, was arrested on the spot. Early tests suggested no alcohol, but investigators later found traces of cocaine in his blood. Questions swirled. Was it reckless driving, mechanical failure, or something darker? Forensic teams worked deep into the night, cranes eventually pulling the truck back onto the road as stunned villagers watched in disbelief. The victims were all locals: mothers, fathers, grandparents, neighbors, people who had shared this community for decades. Their absence was immediate and unbearable. Mayor Charlie Aptroot arrived to console the grieving, remarking how deeply the tragedy had scarred his town, but also how fiercely the community had come together in its grief. Even the Prime Minister of the Netherlands, Mark Rutte, spoke out, calling it a terrible drama and sending his condolences to the families shattered by the crash. But words could not undo the damage. Chairs lay overturned, bunting still fluttered in the breeze, and the ground bore the scars of the truck's deadly path. What was meant to be a joyful summer evening became one of the darkest moments the village had ever known. A haunting reminder that sometimes tragedy strikes not on highways or busy cities, but right in the heart of a community gathering where no one ever expects it.